Hey friends, welcome to Homegrown Florida. I'm Patrina. Where I live, pests are extremely destructive. I mean, we have nonstop pests. They don't stop during the winter, they just slow down and then they regroup, have more babies and come out in full force during summer. It is impossible, I think, to live in Florida and grow an organic garden and not have pests. So how do we deal with them? Well, I'm going to walk through today all the different kinds of pests and how I treat them in my garden so that you know how to treat them in yours. But stay tuned because the number one top of the list, how to handle any pests with the least minimal amount of effort from you, is going to be at the end, so you don't want to miss that. Since this might be a little bit longer of a video than typical, I am going to go ahead and add the timestamps in the description so you can check those out if you're looking for a very specific bug. The first one we're going to start with is actually existing right here on these green stalks, and that's going to be all the little guys, right? So ants, aphids, whiteflies, spider mites, all the tiny little pests that end up on stuff. And I'm not sure you're going to be able to see it from the camera, but as I move these plants around and kind of shake them, the little whiteflies fly everywhere. So all of these have whiteflies. And one of the main things that I have noticed when it comes to all these little pests is that they particularly go after plants that are not in season. So what do I mean by that? I've got some cabbage right here, and I have some celery, some sorrel, some parsley, and all of these like to grow during our winter. We are into spring now, and well into spring, and in here in Florida, we're basically almost summer. We're just like around the corner from summer. So these guys are technically out of season right now in my area. Now they still can grow because they haven't bolted yet, and they haven't, they haven't started to look awful. But the pests know before we do when something is in season and out of season, and it knows that these plants are on their way out. So they go after the plants that are more susceptible than they do healthy plants. So when you're looking at your tomatoes right now, your tomatoes probably look super healthy, right? They don't have any pest activity because they're in their prime. But your cabbages, your kales, your kohlrabis, your brassicas, your carrots, your root vegetables, all those guys, they're starting to look a little off right now, and they're starting to harbor some pests. That's because they go after the more susceptible plants. So how do we deal with them? So let's first start out with the relationship between ants and aphids, right? Because this one is a really big one that I hear a lot about. I get a lot of questions about how do I get rid of the ants in my garden. Ants in and of themselves are not bad for the garden. They actually don't chew up the plants. They don't get in there. Now, if you have fire ants, red ants in your beds and you're trying to work in your beds and you're getting just bitten up because of fire ants, that's kind of a different situation, and we're going to talk about how to get rid of ants in that situation. When it comes to aphids, the ants are actually carrying on their backs the aphids to the perfect parts of the plant, like the new leafy growth of the plant. So the very tips of these celeries are going to have more aphids than like down in the stems of them. So the ants are like carrying them up there, and what happens is the aphids start plucking into the leaves and drawing out the moisture and the sugars from the plants. And then they excrete that, and then the ants eat the sugary secretion. So they have like this symbiotic relationship where the ants are carrying them around or taxiing them around, and the aphids are feeding the ants with it. So you want to try to get rid of both in that situation. But really, if you see just a few ants hanging around and there's not aphids involved, there's really no reason to treat them. They're not really doing anything wrong. Now, there's two ways that I like to get rid of ants in a very natural, organic way. So the first thing that I do is ground cinnamon. I buy like a big one of these at like those big box stores, like the Costco's, the Sam's Clubs, the BJ's, those. And I get the biggest container of cinnamon that I can that's cheap. It doesn't have to be the real cinnamon. It doesn't have to be Ceylon. It just has to be ground cinnamon. And I dust this. Here, let me show you what I do, because to me, you can shake it, right? Or you can do like this puff thing. That's what I do. And it kind of like puts a puff over all of the plants, and it smells like Thanksgiving in your garden. It's wonderful. This is the one that I usually go to, but it tends to have an issue in that it's not going to kill them on contact. It's really just like a smell that they're trying to avoid. Also, it washes away with rain. So it will go away with rain, and you'll have to reapply it. And that's okay this time of year when we're not getting very much rain, but When we get to summer and we're raining every day, yeah, this isn't very helpful. Next one is this guy right here. This titanious earth, or DE is what it's called. You definitely want to get the food grade one. There's different kinds. So this is made from, it looks like fossil shell flour. So it's basically fossil shells that they have grind up into a powder, and it's sharp. So when the ants or when the aphids crawl on it, they get like micro incisions, and so that eventually kills them, dries them out, and then they die. So that's a really good option. Just like with the cinnamon though, with rain, it washes away, so you have to keep reapplying it. Now that one, you're not necessarily gonna apply on the plant like you would the cinnamon. You actually are you're gonna put that down in the bottom, like near the soil. The next level to get rid of them is to use something like insecticidal soap. This is horticulture oil, but neem oil, horticulture oil kind of goes into the same family. I don't keep neem oil in my garden, so I don't like it. Personally, guys, I'm gonna just hop on a soapbox here. I have never seen neem be effective. And maybe it's just my garden, maybe it's the way I was mixing it. I'm not really 100% sure, but I have never seen it be effective side by side with other treatment options. So I don't use it. I actually thought that I was buying spinoside, and I accidentally picked the wrong thing, and that's why I have this. And if you see it, it's never even been opened. I don't use it. I used to have neem. I have tried it, but then I got rid of it because I don't find it effective. The most that it ever did to me was burn my plants and pretty much take out a whole entire crop, and I was like, never again. It's probably me, right? Because I hear people talk all the time about how wonderful neem oil is. So it was probably me. It was probably something I was doing when I was mixing it, or how I was applying it. I know you're not supposed to apply it when there's sunlight, so I was doing it at night. Just didn't seem to matter. It just always burned my plants. Insecticidal soap has a similar situation, right? The soap can cause your plants to burn. But I have found that the actual soap is effective in getting rid of aphids as compared to the neem oil. And you know, maybe people who see a lot of effectiveness with the neem oil also mix with insecticidal soap, and maybe that's what they're seeing. I don't know. Like I said, maybe it's me. But either way, I know that there's folks that have had good experiences with neem. Now, insecticidal soaps, like I have tried many different kinds, and many different kinds I have found either are ineffective or burn the plants. And so I haven't really liked it. Then I found this one. I got this because even though I don't treat for aphids technically, because we're going to talk about the #1 reason, the perfect thing that you can do for your garden that will make you not have to do any of this stuff, that's at the end of the video. But I do have plants inside of my pool cage, and because they're inside of my pool cage, they're not exposed to like other insects in the environment and all the good things that would keep these populations down. So I have to get some insecticidal soap to deal with them, and I got this brand. And I love this brand. This brand only has been the only one that's worked for me. And I just wait till the evening and I spray it all over, and it gets rid of them immediately. You have to go back and treat these things multiple times, because those ants are gonna go away, and then if they don't die, or if their brothers and sisters come along, they're gonna bring new aphids, and you kind of have to keep doing it over and over. Now, the other way that I strongly encourage, which is the least invasive way of dealing with aphids and ants, is to spray them off with water. So take your hose with a strong sprayer and kind of spray the leaves until you've been able to get them all off. You're gonna have to do this every other day for probably a week or two. It's very time intensive, I understand. But if you wanna go super natural, that is the best way to do it, and it will bring down the population enough for you to keep the plant healthy and get your harvest. But I would say in that regard, make sure that you are getting that plant out of the garden as soon as possible. There's a reason they love it. It's either sick or it's out of season. So get it finished and then get it out of the way. And when it comes to fire ants, I have found what you need to do with fire ants is you need to disrupt their life. So you can get like the ant pile killer pesticides, but they are most of the time not organic. I'm sure that there are some out there that are organic. I have never tried them out, but you definitely, I don't know, you may not want to put that in your garden. If the ant piles are outside of your garden, maybe that, you know, is okay for you. Your garden, your choice, right? But inside the actual garden, I wouldn't necessarily use a pesticide like that. What you can do is you can start bothering them. So one of the ways to bother them that is very, very effective is figure out where their ant pile is. like where a majority of them are hanging out, even if you can't see the pile, as long as you can see a lot of them there. And then I get my kettle with hot boiling water and I pour it right over them, and they all kind of come out and they all kind of die. And when they're coming out, you can also hit them with a set of the insecticidal soap spray, just to kind of make sure that you've taken care of it. And then over the next couple days, I will take a stick and I will kind of root around in that area and see if I have any more kind of coming out. You're kind of trying to get them up and out of that area. You want them to move is basically what you want to do. But the hot water, the boiling hot water, works really, really well. And then, you know, just bothering them every single day. Every time you walk by there, sit there and mess up their little ant hills or their little ant family areas, they will eventually leave and go to another spot. They are going to go somewhere else, probably close by, but fingers crossed, let's hope that they go to a spot that we don't care about, right? Like maybe behind my shed or underneath my compost. I don't care if they hang out there, as long as they're away from the areas where they could harm me or my dogs, or if you have kids, keeping them away from the kids. The next pest on our list is going to be Mealybugs and Scale. And a lot of time I see that happen on my fruit trees. So we're over here by my fruit trees. And one year, it wasn't last summer, but the summer before, I had an incredible infestation of mealybugs. And honestly, I didn't treat them. I don't treat a lot of this stuff, but I could see how a mealybug or a scale infestation could really get out of hand. Now, they were mainly on my sweet potatoes, so I wasn't really worried. They could take the sweet potatoes out and it would be fine. It kind of almost kept them on the sweet potatoes and left these trees alone. Last year, I had almost no issues with scale or mealybugs on my fruit trees. But if I did, one of the things I would definitely do is treat the perennial plants, because the scale and mealybugs are pretty intense in terms of how they go after the plant. Mealybugs are fuzzy. Scale kind of looks like a smooth, like white bump. They're almost always white, and they will go onto the branches, the stem of the plant or the tree, and they will chew into that and suck all of the nutrition out of it. And they're pretty aggressive in their life cycle and reproducing themselves, and then they get really out of control really fast. So if you see them, this is one of the pests that I would say that when I see them, I try to treat them early, because if it gets far enough past you, they're going to reproduce at a rate that you can't keep up with. So this is one of the ones that you definitely want to try to get a handle on very early on. Now, the way that I take care of them in the most organic method that I know how is that I take a Q-tip and some alcohol, just like alcohol, like in wound treatment care that we use in our bathroom, and I will dip my Q-tip in the alcohol, and trying not to touch the tree very much, I will actually just touch the mealybug or the scale with the alcohol. That is generally enough to kill them. And then you just kind of tap them with that. If you want to kind of wipe them off as you're doing that, that's fine as well. Some of them kind of really attach onto it, almost like a tick attaches onto us. They attach onto the stem of the plant or the branch of the plant, and they really don't want to let go. But if you just touch them with a little bit of that alcohol, it should kill them. And just really get after them every single day. Have your alcohol bottle out there in your Q-tip and just kind of get rid of as many as possible. Now, one good thing is there is trap crops. I kind of learned the hard way that sweet potatoes was a trap crop for them, at least in my garden that season. So it's one of the things I definitely grow every single year now. I love sweet potatoes. They still produced even with the mealybugs on them, but it seemed to be that they took the full brunt of the attack all summer long as I had sweet potatoes in the garden. But another plant that does that really, really effectively is going to be nasturtiums. And that's what these guys are here. A vining nasturtium, these are bush, but a vining nasturtium is going to be even better because it has the long vines that they like to attach to, rather than these bush ones that maybe don't have as long of a stem or as thick of a stem as the vining varieties do. So get yourself a vining variety. You can grow it up a trellis. You could grow it off on the side in a pot. You could put it anywhere. You could put it underneath your fruit trees like I've done here. Let it vine up the fruit trees, whatever you like, right? But if you get a trap crop in, they will migrate to that trap crop and hopefully leave the rest of your garden alone. So that is the two methods that I use for handling mealybugs and scale. Now the next one is this one right here, which is going to be leaf miners. I have quite a bit of leaf miner damage on this little tomato right here. I was running out of space in the garden, so I was like, hey, let's put a couple in some pots and bring them in here. Well, it's a little bit harder when I bring them inside my pool cage because there's not a lot of predatory insects to handle. I have a lot of leaf miners on these tomatoes. Now, typically leaf miners are a pest that don't destroy the whole plant. It does make the leaves look really bad, and in some cases they can get really out of control. Now, the way that I handle them is most of the time I don't do anything. I don't even pick the leaves off. I just kind of leave them alone, and eventually they kind of calm down. But I know for some people, they have told me that they have a significant amount to the point that the plant starts to decline because it doesn't have enough surface area to photosynthesize because it is all taken up by the leaf miner. There's really only 2 organic methods I know of to handle leaf miners. There are other non-organic methods. I think the one that comes to mind is a midicloprid. You know me, guys, I can't pronounce anything. But that one is banned in some other countries, so I don't use stuff like that personally in my garden, but it is an option. So the 2 organic ways of getting rid of leaf miners is, number 1, take the whole leaf off. Now, I have actually done that here. There were more leaves down here that I took off because the leaf miners were so excessive on those. And I was leaving these just to leave a little bit more foliage, and then once it has a little bit more up top, I will take these off. I'm kind of taking it off slowly. The other thing that you can do besides just taking the leaves, because the example with this tomato plant is if I took them all off, then there wouldn't be any leaves to photosynthesize and feed the plant, because they almost all have some damage to them. So if I took them all off, the plant would die. So I'm leaving some on, and then I'm going to clip them off as the plant grows. But in the meantime, to try to decrease what's happening here, you can try to attempt to manually kill the worm that's living inside of the leaf. That's what a leaf miner is. It's like a microscopic worm that's living in between the plant tissue of the leaf. And the way to do that is simply just to find the little trails, because you can kind of see the paths that they take, right? They run around in like little circles inside the leaf. And then you just take it and you pinch your fingers in the trail. And I've had them to where I can actually almost feel, I swear I feel, maybe it's a psychological thing with me, but I can almost feel, like as I'm pinching it, where the actual leaf miner or the little worm is inside of the leaf. And so once I pinch them, for the most part, they stop growing, like they stop moving. You won't see new trails. You won't see them move to other leaves if you have been able to locate them. But just pinch all along from the beginning to the end of the trail and everywhere in between, and you should destroy them. If you're getting great information from this video, why don't you try out my book? I have this in an ebook copy on my website, homegrownfloridagarden.com. You can go to the front page and there's a little buy button there, or you can go up to the top where it says the menu and then go to my store, and you can see my Shopify store where I'm selling the ebook version of this. It's a great way for you guys to help support the channel, and I would really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. The next one on our list is going to be leaffoot bugs, aka stink bugs. There's a lot of actual bugs that live in this family. I think even squash bugs are technically like a form of leaffoot bugs. But anyway, we're going to talk about those in a separate one. But leaffoot bugs are rather difficult for me. I have a pretty solid infestation pretty much every summer in my garden. And they particularly love my tomatoes. And if they bite your tomatoes enough, like 1 or 2 bites isn't like a big deal, but if they pierce them more than a couple of times, they actually cause an infection in the tomatoes. And that infection will make the tomatoes unable to ripen. So it happened to me last year. I was not here during our fall season. I went on vacation and I left my tomatoes up to their own devices. So what happened was the leaffoot bugs got out of control because I wasn't here to kind of hand manage them, which normally the way that I manage them is just pick them off. You can use like a little handheld vacuum cleaner, or you can do like me, grab a glove and snatch them up. That is usually my preferred way. One way that you can find them really easily is to spray the plant all over. Now that's not really a good option for tomato plants because you don't want to get their leaves wet. But other plants, if you're having a problem with them, you can spray those other plants that maybe are less susceptible to disease, and they'll rise to the top because they don't like being wet, and then you can kind of snatch them up. Some people will use insecticidal soap. This works on the younger ones, or like the softer ones, the softer bodied ones. I think that's because they're younger. The adult ones are like full grown. They're I spray this directly on them. They don't even care. They don't even notice. Another option is to protect the fruit, and I got that this year. I don't know why sometimes that I'm so against like trying new stuff. So people have been telling me about these organza bags for like forever. I got the larger ones because I wanted to be able to use them on anything. So whether it's a tomato fruit cluster, whether it's peaches, whether it's whatever, like avocados, anything, it doesn't matter the size, they'll fit in here. A squash, you know, that would work really well for the pickle worms. We're gonna talk about those in a little bit, but I wanted to get the bigger ones, but for some reason I've always been against like netting or using these organza bags. But this year I'm not going to, because I had such a terrible tomato season last season that I'm like, nope, we're gonna go ahead and use them. And so it's really just this simple. Like, I'm putting this bag around a few clusters. I have like a very large cluster of tomato flowers right here. So I'm gonna wrap it around those clusters, and then I'm just gonna pull the bag closed. Being gentle with these tomatoes. That's it. Now those tomatoes are gonna grow inside of that bag, and those awful leaf foot bugs and stink bugs can play on the plant all they want, but they're not gonna be able to get to the tomatoes, and they're not gonna be able to ruin my crop. And hopefully keeping them away from the actual tomato fruit will make them frustrated. They'll realize that they're not gonna get fed here in this garden, and then they will move on. That is my goal. I am gonna hand pick them. I may even hit them with some insecticidal soaps when they're young, but more than likely I'm just gonna pick them off and bag the fruit and hope that we can get a handle on them that way. That's really the most effective way that I've seen. I am not seeing really any other organic sprays or, you know, methods that have worked to get rid of the adult leaf foot bugs and stink bugs. I'm sitting by my cucumbers because one of the biggest pests for cucumbers are going to be worms. And this can be a lot of different kinds of worms, and there are a lot of different kinds of worms in the garden, right? You can start with army worms and cutworms that kind of hang out at the soil level, and then you have worms like tomato hornworms, earwigs, earworms, pickle worms. I mean, there's probably about 1 million different kinds. The cabbage moth worms. They're almost always transported here by some sort of like moth or butterfly sometimes that will drop them off, and those are technically the babies. Some worms are actually worms, and I think they remain worms. I want to say that's the case for army worms. I don't think that they change into something else. But either way, they all kind of handle the treatment the same way. With the exception, the army worms and the cutworms kind of stay on the soil level here, and they eat the plant once they find them. So the way that I handle all worms is this guy right here. This is Captain Jack's Dead Bug. This is the brand that I like the best, but there's plenty of other brands. This is Spinosad. There's also BT. I cannot even try to pronounce what BT stands for. Bacteria Theratosis. I'm sorry, guys. You know, my pronunciations are awful. But BT is very effective. Spinosad is also very effective. I like this one better than BT because BT does wash off with rain. This one doesn't wash off. It also lasts longer. And the reason why that's important is because Spinosad and BT, while they're not harmful to, you know, the bees and the butterflies directly, because if you sprayed this plant and then 2 weeks later a bee came by, they'll be fine. The problem is if you're spraying it while they're around. So it's very important to only spray these items in the evening after our pollinator friends have gone home. Not because like spraying them during the day is going to hurt the plant or anything like that, but because it does hurt the pollinators if you spray it on here or if it's wet and those pollinators touch it. Now, my reason why I like Spinosad more than BT, other than the fact that it doesn't wash off with rain, is that it lasts so much longer. BT will probably last between like 5 and 7 days, and then it kind of wears off with or without rain. Spinosad will last for like 3 to 4 weeks. So there's less of a likelihood that I'm going to disrupt the bees and butterflies if I only have to spray this once a month, right? So that's why I particularly like this. Another reason is I feel like the Spinosad lasts longer and can handle higher temperatures. I don't like to keep these things like the BT and the Spinosad inside my house, so I keep it in my shed. Now the downside is BT deteriorates in high temperatures. Like my shed gets very, very hot during the summer. It is enclosed and it is Florida. It is hot. Even though there's shade over my shed, it doesn't matter. That thing is like boiling inside. So the BT is dead. It's a bacteria, so it needs to be alive to be able to be useful. But that bacteria is dead after a summer season in my garage. So I would have to keep it inside, and I'm not really keen on keeping that kind of stuff inside my house. Garden stuff stays in the garden, you know, household stuff stays in the house. Spinosad, I have noticed, does very well in high heat. I leave it in my shed, and it has never seemed to be a problem. Used it season after season. That's why I have the big bottle. If you're concerned and you do want to use BT, I would definitely suggest like using a smaller container. Don't buy the big ones, because you are going to have to buy it every single year if you want to leave it outside. Otherwise, you need to bring it inside into, you know, an AC area. Now the way these work is you mix them with water, or you can buy the kind, not like the concentrated mix, but the kind in a spray bottle that's already mixed for you, and you just spray the leaves of the plants. The way that it kills the worm is a little bit different than what you might expect. It doesn't kill the worm on contact. You can see a worm and spray it, and that worm's still going to be alive. It takes about 2 or 3 days for it to work, because what it does is the worm actually eats a part of the leaf, and then after it's eaten it and it's consumed some of that BT or spinosad, then it kind of gunks up its digestive system and makes it not eat anymore. And once it stops eating, then it passes away. And that's actually how they die. So it usually takes between 2 or 3 days before you see a population reduction. But in those 2 or 3 days, it's going to work really, really well. Now, because worms become so aggressive in my garden, I actually take on a maintenance spray once we start getting into late spring. Once I start seeing moths in my garden, I know that that is a time that I need to start spraying these plants. And I just do them on a regular rotation monthly. If you're not really into spraying anything onto your plants and you have a worm problem, then your other option is to cover the plants with some insect netting. If the moths can't come and lay their babies on your plants, they can't the worms can't chew them up. So that it's just a physical deterrent. For armyworms and cutworms, which generally happen at soil level here, you can do collars. So you put a toilet paper roll around the base of the stem of the plant and kind of block the stem from the cutworms or the armyworms, and then as they're coming through, they can't get through the collar. It's not like it's impossible for them to climb up and over the collar, they just generally don't do that. The next one on our list is going to be grasshoppers, and for us down here in the south, that's going to be the loober grasshopper. I've had a lot of grasshoppers in my garden, and none of them really got out of control, so I didn't really treat them. But this kind of goes interchangeable, whether you're talking about the lubers or you're talking about any other grasshopper. The loober grasshopper is very known in my particular area, in lots of parts of Florida. I think they maybe even go to like the Georgia and Alabama areas, Texas maybe. You guys let me know down in the comments. I'm not 100% sure where they migrate to. But they are pretty destructive. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that are like, let them live, you know, let them do their thing, they're not going to chew it up that bad. But I have found that they are pretty destructive depending on what plant you're growing. So when I grow beans, they really like the beans. And normally it's not like a huge deal to me because the beans outpace the work that they do in their destructive patterns of chewing up. So when I'm growing cowpeas grow pretty prolifically. Puerto Rican black beans that I grow during the summer, they do. But there's other plants, particularly a lot of like my flowering plants that I'm growing up front, a lot of lilies that they really go after. They just particularly love them. And they will chew them pretty aggressively to the point that I have lost a lot of plants. So the best way to handle lubers, or grasshoppers in particular, is when you find them, and in the luber pot, I'm going to focus on lubers at this point, guys, because they are way more of a nuisance than pretty much any other grasshopper I've ever encountered. When you find them, usually you're going to find them when they're young. They should start coming out any day now. Like I would expect that they might be out in some of the southern areas. We've had a little bit of nicer, cooler weather that's been happening lately, so maybe they haven't started waking up here. But when they do, they come out in like little hordes of a bunch of them, and you will see them together usually. And if you have any form of a lily plant or a plant that kind of behaves like a lily, I have society garlic that they like really love. I would just start looking at those plants over the next, couple of weeks and see if you can find any, because they will remain there and they will hang out there until they start to get a little bit bigger. When they're young like that, you can use a little vacuum like you would on a leaf foot bug, or you can just grab them with a gloved hand and squish them. I know it's gross, but that's probably the quickest way to get rid of them. Soapy water, I think, works at that age too. Once they've gotten to an older age, and you'll know they're older because they change colors. When they're little, they're like black and red, or they're like black with a red stripe. When they get older, they start to turn like this yellow color. It's like a black and a yellow, or like a gray and a yellow. And they have wings. They don't fly though. Good news, they don't fly. They're not good flyers. They do have wings, but they're like an immature wing that they no longer use. But they jump very far, and they're pretty aggressive jumpers. Like they leap from plant to plant. But when they get to that age, they're much, much harder to destroy. You can't really smush them when you step on them. They have an exoskeleton that is very, very hard, almost to the point that I have kind of stomped on them and they just jump away. They're pretty wild. So at that point, I don't want to get too graphic with you guys, but I think it's important to know how to destroy them, right? So if you don't like this part, skip to the next part of this video. But I take my clippers, my pruning shears, I grab them with one hand with their head sticking out the top here, and I sever their head. And then I usually take the pieces that are left of them, the body, and I put it in a 5-gallon bucket that then makes it into the trash. Because horrifically, I have heard that if they are old enough and they have bred in their reproduction age, that their babies will stay within their little dead bodies, and then they will emerge in spring the next year. So you do want, I don't know if that's 100% true. Don't hold me on that part, but somebody told me that once and I was like, all right, they're going in the trash. So make sure that you like dispose of them properly to where they're no longer on your property, or you can put them in a fire pit and burn them, or however you want to destroy them. I would not necessarily put them in your tumblers. They are poisonous to some level, not to us humans, but to animals that try to eat them. They are poisonous. There are certain animals that can eat them, and I thought it was so cool. I think it was not last year, but the year before, there is a specific kind of bird, it's a certain kind of wren, that eat them. And what they do is they will take their little beak and they will, catch them, and then they will pierce them onto like branches or stakes or something on your fence, and let them dry out that way. And then once they've dried out, apparently that poison doesn't bother that bird, and then they eat them. It's incredibly weird. We did find a bird, which we believe were a wren, that had a little part of the trees behind our house with a bunch of these loopers just kind of stuck to the branches of the tree. It was the oddest thing, but I was like, that's gotta be that bird, because that bird is the only one that I know of that behaves like that and eats the lubers like that. So it was really cool to see nature doing its thing. But even with that bird around here doing that work, we still had a ton of adult lubers that year that I was dealing with, as well as what he was eating. So they get really destructive, and that's really the only way I know to handle them. I don't know of any sprays or any organic methods that you can do that are going to destroy them, even at a young age. But most certainly nothing will work as they get older. They're just, they're just too indestructible. The next one on the list is going to be slugs and snails. And I have a pretty good amount of slugs and snails in my garden, mainly because of the way that I mulch. So I mulch with a lot of wood pieces. I mulch with plant debris. So if I were to take this cabbage off, I would take all these leaves and just chuck them in the bed. That is kind of the best way to attract snails and slugs. It's not my intention to do that. I just like using organic mulches, and organic mulches are going to, attract slugs and snails. They like to live under them. They like to eat them. And then on top of that, we have a wet environment here. The mulch keeps my soil nice and wet underneath. It's like the perfect environment for them. Now during the winter, they're not here very much. And in fact, they're just now starting to come out, and you can kind of see these little holes. Let me see if I can break one of these off for you guys. You can kind of see like the holes that are coming through. This is all slug and snail damage. The way to know for sure it's a slug or a snail is if you're looking at this cabbage and you see the bottom leaves have those holes in them, but the center doesn't, that's more than likely slugs and snails, because they like to kind of stay at ground level. They're not the kind that really like to like cover on top unless you have a really big infestation. They usually like to kind of stay underneath, and they only come out at night. They don't come out during the day, or very rarely will they come out during the day, maybe sometimes if it's cloudy. But that's how you're going to know you have them. And it's around this time of year that they start re-emerging. They're not out during the winter. So what I do with them, there's a couple different options. One, you can keep your garden super clean, no mulch, just dirt. And they don't particularly like that very much. They don't like sand, so I put a layer of sand on top of my dirt, and they don't particularly like that very much. It kind of dries them out. They like to stay wet. Drying your garden out. Once again, watering it less is going to help. That's a little bit of a struggle for me, because down here, if I don't use mulch and if I don't water deeply and keep the soil moist, my plants are going to suffer because of where I live. It's very hot down here, and having the right moisture level underneath the soil is really what keeps my plants healthy and thriving. And mulch and organic material and all of those good things is what helps create that, but it also means it really encourages slugs and snails. Now, a few ways that you can treat slugs and snails is, one of them is beer traps. So get a bowl from inside your house, a small one, and kind of bury it to where the bowl is at ground level, the top of the bowl. Fill the bowl with beer or anything that's really sugary and yeasty. I think even kombucha could probably work, but you want something like that. Beer has always been the easiest one. And then they are attracted to it. They will crawl and fall into there, and then you can pull them out every morning, dump them, put more beer. Another way that I like to use, because I honestly just don't keep beer around the house, so I never happen to have that, is get like cardboard, wet the cardboard and put it flat down, like move some mulch and put it flat down on your soil, and leave it overnight. And when you come out the next morning, you can flip it over and you'll find them all kind of affixed and attached to the bottom of that wet cardboard. They like that a lot. And then if all of that doesn't work, something that I do use is Sluggo. Sluggo is an organic product. It's like a pellet. And basically what you do is you sprinkle it through the garden. And generally the way that I handle this is I don't want to have to be sprinkling this all the time, because there is some indication that it's not great for birds. So usually at the beginning of spring, which just happened, I will see some of these bite marks and know that I have some slugs and snails, and I will put down a quick light layer of this through all the garden beds just to bring that population down right at the beginning. I will usually do a second application of this when we're deep into summer and I see that they've come out in an aggressive manner. Normally, I don't mind a little bit. Like, I'm not going to really be eating these back leaves anyway, so I'm not really concerned that they're eating them. What I'm more concerned with is how they're repopulating. We do something called slug hunting. So when my nieces come to visit me, one of them is particularly in love with slug hunting. At night, we'll come out with a flashlight when we're walking the dogs before bed, and we'll put gloves on, and she will grab as many slugs as she can find, and then we dispose of them. I don't know, she's like 8. She absolutely loves to do that. So we do slug hunts where we'll come out in the garden and we'll find them at night and grab them and just dispose of them. So those are your options for dealing with slugs and snails. Probably the easiest is to dry out your garden and they won't want to be there. Get rid of the mulch, Sluggo, or try slug hunting. The next set of pests we're going to talk about are what I'm going to call composters, and that's going to be spiders, millipedes, roaches, and earthworms. And we're hanging out by the compost bin because that's what they do. Now spiders are a little bit different because they're more of a predatory bug. So I guess they're not really composters, but I kind of put them all in the same category because while they are scary and like nobody wants to hang out with these bugs, they are incredibly useful for the garden. So spiders will create webs and they will catch a lot of these bad bugs that you don't want in your garden. They will catch them and then they eat them. And so they're really, really helpful for the garden. But I know a lot of us are not really thrilled to have spiders in our garden. But I really encourage you that when you find spiders, really try to figure out which kind of spider you're looking at to make sure that, you know, that they're not venomous or poisonous or anything like that. You obviously want to handle those in a different way, but if they're just garden spiders and they're not going to harm you or your pets or your kids, then if you can leave them, they are the best. I have wolf spiders living inside of my garden beds. It's terrifying. They burrow inside of the soil and it is just terrifying every time I put my hands in my soil. I love putting my hands in the soil, but ever since I saw them in there, I'm like, I'm putting on gloves from now on. They're totally harmless to us humans. They do bite from what I understand. I've never had that experience, thankfully, but they are great for the garden. They eat all kinds of pests in the garden. Now, the next ones, roaches and millipedes. Really, I mean, I have goosebumps right now. It just, it's so, I don't like them at all. But they are incredible composters. And if you really want a good organic soil that's made from all these organic materials and the wood chips and the compost and, you know, the organic mulches, like they're going to end up in your garden. And especially down here in Florida where we have palmetto bugs, they're going to be here. The American cockroach is going to be in there. Millipedes, you'll see them in the thousands, especially if you're using like a wood mulch. They're not really harmful to your plants, guys. It may feel like it because there's so many of them sometimes, but they're specifically with the millipedes. But I had the first year that I started my garden, if you haven't seen the video, I talk about how I start all my raised beds and I start them with wood mulch. I'll put that video down in the description. But I start them with almost all wood mulch and then I just put good soil on top. There's a little bit more to it than that, but the wood mulch really draws in the millipedes because they are there to compost that down. And there was hundreds of thousands. I would guess that there was probably millions of millipedes in my bed, and it was very scary because I'm like, oh my gosh, anytime I see any kind of level of that amount of pests, I'm wondering like if there's a problem, like there is a serious problem, but it wasn't. They didn't disturb the plants. They broke down the soil and now I have the most incredible soil, and the next year they weren't there. I mean, on occasion, especially with my wood mulch, I will see them here and there. The roaches, that's another thing, right? I see them in my compost bin. I hate those, but when I'm rotating them, they come flying out. When I open them, they come flying out. They're crawling around in there. It's really gross. Now, it's not an infestation level of gross, right? You're not opening them to thousands of roaches. There's usually like, you can see one or two of them in there doing their job. Or in the garden at night, if you go around and you're walking around and checking out your garden, you might see one or two. If you have a heavy infestation, you know, obviously there might be something that you want to take a look at. You might want to remove some of the organic products and put down, you know, bigger pieces of wood mulch or something like that, something that's a little bit harder for them to break down. You might want to take a break on the compost or make the compost more wood heavy because the nitrogen element in it or the green materials in it really draw them into the compost. But as long as it's just a handful, guys, it's really not a problem. But if you see like ridiculous amounts, like you have an off balance there in your garden, you don't have enough brown material to your green material is typically where it's at. And then earthworms. Now this could be soldier fly worms. That's something you see in the compost that really freaks people out a lot of the time because they're not used to seeing that kind of amount of worms. They're actually good. Earthworms in your garden, they get really big sometimes. They get really fat and big and they scare you sometimes when you're digging around or when you're opening your compost and you just weren't expecting to see that level of bugs. But that is their job. That is what they're doing. And in fact, seeing those soldier fly larvae in here or seeing earthworms in your bed means that you have healthy soil. So it's actually a good thing to see these bugs. It means you have a lot of organic material going on. I would be more concerned if I'm digging around in my bed and I never see any of these bugs because they are the composters. If you're digging around and you never see them, more likely than not, you don't have enough organic material in your garden, which means that your plants aren't getting fed. And if they're not being fed, you might be seeing poorer production. So they're important to have. You want to encourage them by adding organic materials, but also don't freak out. If you see them, as long as you're not like dealing with incredibly intense, heavy issues, don't freak out. They're doing their job, and when their job's over, they leave. I've never once had an issue with any of those guys making it into my home. They stay put in the garden. It's kind of like a trap crop. They like to be out here where all that stuff is. In there, it's, you know, it's not their ideal setting. They would rather be out here. So I hope that gives you some comfort. The next one you might see a lot of in the pest category is going to be like lizards and frogs. And down here in Florida, lizards are extreme, right? So we have, in my area, I get anoles and Cuban tree frogs, which are invasive species. And so if you can catch them, destroy them. I can't seem to catch them. So they're too quick for me. I can't really get to them. So I don't really fuss with them too much. I do see that the lizards kind of seem to keep the population of stuff down. They eat some of the bigger bugs. I've seen them carry off leaffoot bugs and stink bugs. So that's cool. I don't mind that they eat that. And I know that the frogs are predatory in nature as well. So they're going to eat that stuff too. So I don't really fuss with them that much. I don't worry. I do have high amounts. I'm kind of looking over my shoulder because I keep like seeing something out of the corner of my eye. They almost always are hanging out on this screen. On this side or the other side, I usually have a ton. It got a little cold last night, so I guess that they're hiding right now, or they're trying to stay warm. But usually they like hang out on my pool cage and catch different kinds of bugs all day long. So I don't worry about them. They are really good at catching some of the bad bugs. So you may just kind of want to find a way to live with them. There's one exception to this, and that's going to be our friends down in South Florida have iguanas. I don't get them here. Thank goodness. My friend Jacqueline over at the Wild Floridian, she's in St. Pete. She doesn't get them. So it's a little bit more south than that. So those guys are extremely destructive. They are also invasive, and they are almost impossible to keep out. And from what I've experienced and from what I've talked to, I do some consultation, some one-on-one consultation with folks. And I've had a lot of people in South Florida that I've done these consultations with, and we've talked about how to keep these guys out. And the best way that I have seen that one of my viewers did was around her garden bed, she created, I don't even know what to call it. It's basically a cage. It's basically like what you would see in a chicken run. And it's over the top and it's down on the bottom. It doesn't have to be like really fine mesh. It just needs to be enough that these guys can't get inside. So iguanas can crawl. They can climb. They can get up into the trees. They're like squirrels. They'll like climb up in the trees and then come down in a different area. They are very maneuverable to get to your plants, and they very much love to eat gardens. They can take out a garden in a day. I had another client of mine sent me a picture of, no lie, it's like 10 to 15 of these things just laid out across his front yard. It was wild how many they get down there. They aren't around as much during the winter because they don't like cold temperatures. There's kind of a big joke in Florida. There's like a falling iguana up report. Like if South Florida gets below 40 degrees, the iguanas actually fall out of the trees and you're not supposed to touch them. They're not dead. They look dead. They're upside down and all that stuff. You're not supposed to touch them though, because they will warm up and wake up and go on about their day. I know. For anyone who doesn't live in Florida, I know that that is probably the most odd thing, but it happens. There's news reports of like the iguanas falling on people, and they're not a small lizard. They're not like this. They're big with long tails. Oh man. So some options other than, you know, creating a fencing around every single one of your beds with a top. That's important, not just sides. You can also set up traps. They are an invasive species, so that it is encouraged to hunt them. So you could do trapping of them, but then you would have to destroy them. And they're a larger pest, so I know that that's not everyone's forte. So your best bet is to try to grow during the season when they're most dormant, which is during the winter, which is actually the perfect season for our friends in South Florida to grow. Or also create a fence. At the very least, having a fence around your house is going to deter most of them. And then having a method or a way of trapping or catching them and either moving them or destroying them. I would definitely destroy them before I would move them, because then you're making them somebody else's problem. But I know that that's not for everyone. The next pest on our list is going to be the little rodents, right? So you have mice, rats, voles, and squirrels. Hello. This is one of my treatment methods, which is a little terrier dog, or a big dog, really. Any dog that likes to chase. Thankfully, both of my dogs really love to chase, and the squirrel hunter herself, who's really good at finding all the squirrels and the mice. Come here, you. Let's introduce you. This is Chloe. Chloe is our primary squirrel and mouse catcher. But they both do a really good job. If you really want to get serious about the squirrels and the mice and the rats and the voles, get yourself a pet. I'm partial to tiny dogs, but they're terriers. They love to chase tiny things. Big dogs also like to chase things, but you also have cats, right? And I'm not saying go get a cat just to be your outside cat, especially not like a domestic cat. What I would encourage you to get is there are programs like barn cat rescues or feral cat rescues where they have taken in feral cats from I forget what they call them, but where they find where a bunch of feral cats have come together and they've created a community, and they try to separate them. They try to get the cats fixed and then break up that community. But then they give them jobs like barn cats. So if you find these organizations, you can get 2 feral cats. I think they generally encourage you to get 2, and then you put them in your area and you feed them. And your job is not to pet them or make them your pet. You're just supposed to take care of them. You're supposed to feed them. You're supposed to make sure that they have their shots and the things that they need from the vet's office. The program that you work with is going to tell you everything that you need to do. But really, they are so good at catching stuff, and they will catch the mice and the rats. And just be warned, when these guys catch stuff, they kill it and they bring it to you. I'm so thankful that my guys don't actually catch anything. They're too slow. I love them, but they're just too slow. They've never actually caught anything, but they do together trap them. They'll push them up a tree, or they'll push them in a corner, and they'll keep them there until my husband and I can come out and deal with them. All right, let's talk about dealing with them. So if you're able to trap them, traps are a great option. I wouldn't do sticky traps because there's too many other animals outside, like birds and lizards and frogs, that are going to get caught on those, and they're not your intended audience. But the snap traps are good, or the cage traps that kind of enclose them in the area. Those are good options. Another one that I saw, I haven't tried, but it looks really useful, is where you have a 5-gallon bucket and the top has a swing to it, and then they crawl up on the top to get the food that you have planted there. Not planted, I'm sorry, that you have baited right there, and then they step onto the thing and they fall into the bucket, and it catches all of them in a bucket. I believe my brother-in-law does this because he has a neighbor who has a very mature mango tree, and the mango tree drops its mangoes and they don't pick them up, and it attracts rats. So for those of you who've asked me, I know a ton of you have, about, do fruit trees attract rats and squirrels and mice and all that stuff? They kind of do, but only if you're not keeping the fruit trees clean. So what I mean by that is if it's dropping fruit on the ground, rotting fruit is going to attract those animals, all of them, mulberries, anything. So I go through and I clean up the trees every week and make sure that there's no fruit underneath. I will harvest as much as I possibly can, even the stuff that's not really good. If it has too many worms or it's been chewed up by a squirrel or something, I don't just leave it on the ground. It goes into the compost bin, or it goes into the trash for whatever reason. It's mainly the compost bin. But as long as you have a way of cleaning up the fruit, you're not going to see an excessive amount of rats. Now, I do get rats and squirrels in my area, and I wouldn't say quite a few. I get enough, right? So now, once you've been able to catch them either in your trap or in that little 5-gallon bucket, or your dogs or your cat have cornered them, how do you get rid of them, right? Once again, there's different levels, right? You can relocate them. That is one option. Just look into your county's recommendations on how to do that, because different counties have different rules about how you relocate animals like that. You could destroy them. This one's a hard one to talk about because there's not a lot of super humane ways to do that. So what we do is we have a pellet gun. My husband is very experienced with that, and so he's the one that does it, because I'm concerned that if I were to do it, I might cause the animal to suffer longer than it needs to. He is a perfect shot every single time, and he takes care of it, and that animal doesn't suffer. So those are your options. I know they're not the best options. Snap traps are another option where, you know, I think you've seen these like mouse traps where they snap shut. That usually destroys or eliminates the mouse or the rat very quickly. When it comes to squirrels, I don't trap them. I don't really deal with squirrels much. I have a ton of them. Don't get me wrong. I have a ton of squirrels. I have way more squirrels than I have mice, rats, or voles. Usually in a typical year, we might catch 1 to 2 mice or rats, typically rats. We get rats, we don't get mice. We have had 1 vole that was a little bit of a problem near the garden beds that we finally caught. But squirrels, I mean, we get probably hundreds of these things. We get so many squirrels. For us, we have found that the way to manage squirrels is a little bit different, because the squirrels, yeah, they do want to get your fruit, but they want it to be ripe. So generally what I do is I give them an alternative. So a lot of the times I have left them out food, like nuts, like peanuts, sunflower seeds, those kinds of things. I will leave those out at the time of the year when my fruit trees are at their peak production, in an effort to kind of redirect them. I don't want to have to be trapping and killing squirrels. That's not like my thing. I don't enjoy this. And there's nothing really wrong with squirrels. Like, they're not transmitting disease or anything like that, like a mice or a rat will do. So I don't really want to have to do that. So instead, I'm trying to keep their attention elsewhere. So I'll give them food in another area, not all year round, guys, not all year round, but just in another area while I'm going through my fruit harvest. You can use those organza bags that we used on the tomatoes to cover your fruit, and that makes it harder for them to get, although some of them are pretty persistent and they will get them. And another thing that I do that I think works so well is we have these dog bowls of water that we adhere to the top of our fence to give them a place to drink water. Many times, especially in Florida during this time of year, they are looking for water because we are in our drought season and they're having a hard time locating water or easily locating water where they live. So a lot of times they will use your tomatoes and your peaches and your vegetables to collect the water that they need to survive. So maybe if you give them a source of water, they're less likely to go into the garden. I saw a huge improvement once I gave them a water bowl. You can create like a bird bath, they'll drink out of that. Whatever it is that works for you. We use dog bowls. And then last but not least, the best way to keep squirrels out of your yard is a fence. It's just like the iguanas, right? Giving them a physical barrier. Now, of course, squirrels can climb up trees and jump into your yard, but it reduces the number significantly if you can create a barrier. So all of those things are going to help with those small rodents. I know this is a bit of a weird angle, but I wanted to show you like the trees for our next pest, which is going to be birds. And here I not only get birds, but I get turkeys too, which is so wild. All right, so birds, when it comes to like things like turkeys or the cranes, or we get these little birds, I can't remember what they're called. Usually the fence keeps most of those out. We have one that we call Blue. Blue is like a little bird that comes through, and I think he picks insects. He'll fly over the fence and come down and do it. And he's not even afraid of the dogs. The dogs don't go after him either. I don't understand that. They don't go after birds. They only go after rats, mice, and squirrels. But they don't care about birds. So up in these trees, we get a lot of birds. And the birds here, we get like cardinals. I think we get like little blue jays. We get these little wrens. We get crows. We get falcons, believe it or not. I think they're falcons. Hawks, not falcons. What am I talking about? They're hawks. We get a bunch of different kinds of birds. And most of what I have seen, the birds have been helpful. And they come down and just kind of swoop in and grab all different kinds of bugs off of my garden. And I have found that as long as there's some bugs in my garden for them to go after, they leave the fruits and vegetables alone. And they do like the strawberries, but I feel like the squirrels are worse on the strawberries than the birds are. So if you do have a problem with birds like really going after, like peas are a big one, strawberries, blackberries, blueberries, those kinds of things, you can cover in netting and insect netting, and that's usually enough to get them to stop. Some people even had some really good suggestions for me of putting rocks, painting rocks like strawberries, and putting them next to the strawberry plants when the strawberries are young before they've started to flower. And when the birds come in to try to poke them, it gives them a negative reaction because they're poking a hard rock and realizing it's not a strawberry. And then when the strawberries come in, they basically told themselves that those are rocks, not strawberries, and then they don't go after them. I thought that was pretty cool. Very smart. You can also, I saw somebody else put a fake rubber snake around their strawberries or in the bed of their strawberries with it kind of sticking out so that the birds can see that there's a snake there. And then the other thing that we do is we have these little fake owls on the corners. They've pretty much figured out that those owls don't do anything now, but in the beginning they were terrified of them. Maybe if you move them around or get the animated ones, the ones that move, that's enough to scare them away. And also if you have a dog that is a little bit better than mine don't seem to scare birds away, but maybe if yours scares birds away, that's another option. The birds also look for a watering source as well. So sometimes they go after your tomatoes because they want water. So having that food dog bowl or a bird bath like we do for the squirrels to keep them hydrated, having that for the birds has helped in my area as well. We lose very few vegetables to birds. The next one we're going to talk about are the bigger ones. So that's going to be like deer, raccoon, possums, and any other smaller animals like that. Rabbits, that's another one. So the best deterrent for these types of animals is what you see over my shoulder here, and that's going to be a fence, and not just any fence, guys. A very secure fence. It goes down to the ground. There's no gaps or openings. Preferably a fence like a vinyl fence is really good because it's slick. So things like raccoons, even cats, they have a really hard time climbing up it compared to like a wood fence that has like some texture to it and they can climb through it. There are options with deer. If you cannot put up a fence, you can put up an electric temporary fence. That will keep them out. You could put up a hedge of plants. So particularly spiny plants, I've heard, like blackberries, raspberries, any of those thorny plants, lemons, any citrus really that has those big thorns, but make sure that you keep that plant into like a hedge or a bush so that they're about chest level so that the deer can't really get around them. Now, a deer can jump. So if a deer is really wanting to do it, they're going to get over that. They'll get over a shorter fence. They'll get over an electric fence. They'll chew through a plant that has lots of spiky, spiny things in it. If they really want to, they're going to get into your garden. You really have to have a physical barrier to keep them out. I wish that there was like another option for folks that can't have that kind of level of fencing. And you don't even have to do like this kind of fencing. Like I understand I just said that like vinyl is like the best way to go, yes. But if deer are your main problem, because the smaller ones you can deal with in different ways, we're gonna talk about that. But if deer is your main problem, even just like a wire fence, like a cattle panel type fence, as long as it's high enough to keep them from being able to jump over it, that is a great option. And it's not as expensive as maybe something like a vinyl fence. If you went that route, then you're going to have to deal with the smaller ones because the smaller ones can get through. You can do traps, baits. You can take your cattle panel fence and along the bottom create a solid perimeter around the bottom, whether that's using wood or like plastic, or you can use like a chicken wire fencing on the bottom. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. They're not going to like jump over as much. That keeps them going through the small holes in the bottom like that. Those are your options. I wish there was better options, but you really just have to create some sort of physical barrier between your garden and those animals. And if they do make it inside, you need to have some mechanism to trap them and relocate them. That's really your option. Now that we've gone through all the pests, let's talk about my #1 way to manage pests in the garden. It works with minimal effort. It doesn't require a lot from you. It's great for the environment. It's great for your garden. That's going to be integrated pest management. It's a fancy term for basically allow the ecosystem to develop in such a way that it balances itself. That's the best way I know how to explain that. So what does that mean exactly? Like let's talk, specific things that you can do that creates this integrative pest management system. So one of the things is planting different kinds of plants. So yes, you have a bunch of vegetables. Do you grow your vegetables, like all your tomatoes in one raised bed, or do you interplant you know, basil and parsley and different kinds of herbs and green onions and different kinds of companion plants that, you know, attract the right pests or push out, you know, and resist the bad pests, or a trap crop like a blue Hubbard squash or a chamomile that encourages the bad bugs to come to it and destroys it versus your other pest. So companion planting is a really exceptional way of handling pest issues, and it is part of the pest management process. If you haven't seen my video I did last week on companion planting, definitely check that out. It's very minimal effort that you have to do to grow these companion plants, and you just kind of tuck them in underneath your other plants. You don't have to, you know, buy these plants. Just get some seed and scatter a bunch of them underneath. A bunch will pop up. That's how I do it. Another way of kind of the companion planting method is giving them different kinds of plants. So yeah, we talked about the companion planting, like the herbs and the onions and stuff in the beds, but what about perennial plants like flowering plants, or perennial vegetables like chaya, or fruit trees that help, you know, bring in different kinds of pests and bugs and things like that, that counteract the good versus the bad bugs, right? Then you have natives, which, guys, if you haven't gotten into natives, you really, really need to consider it, especially if you want to go down this integrated pest management system. Putting in some native plants, especially the flowering ones, it attracts an intense amount of pollinators and an intense amount of predatory bugs, and they really balance out the system very quickly. Sometimes the companion plants that we do, or the fruit trees that we do, takes like a season or two, or maybe even a year to really get the right bugs coming in. But a native plant, it's like a magnet. They just latch onto it. And my native plants, I kind of put them in different places around the garden, and so I don't necessarily put them in my beds, although you absolutely could. But native plants typically like to grow in our sandy soil here in Florida, or wherever you're at. You know, it's going to be natives that are where you're at. But they particularly love to grow in the native soil, wherever that is, whatever it looks like. Here in Florida, that's sandy soil. So picking out natives and putting them somewhere in the ground is actually more ideal than trying to put them in a garden bed where you have like a really enriched soil. You don't want to use that space up anyway, because that space is meant for growing these fussy vegetables. So you can find places in the garden around your yard where you just put down some natives. And they are really going to be like the powerhouse winners of pest management. The other thing that you can do, and I did this very early on, before I got into fruit trees, before I got into flowering plants, before I got into natives, before I got into companion planting, I actually followed the advice. I think it was, I want to say it was either Pete Canaris with Green Dreams or Elise with the Urban Harvest. One of those two, or maybe a combination of those two, really encouraged me, like, stop treating your pests. Stop spraying stuff. All those products that I showed you today, I have them in case there's like an intense infestation that occurs, but I rarely use them. It's been probably years since I've used insecticidal soap, except for inside my pool cage where it's a little hard for the ladybugs to get in here. But out in the garden, it's almost nothing is sprayed, because if I spray stuff, that means I'm taking away the food for the good pests. So hear me out on this one. The first season that you're growing and you're moving into, say, summer, right? You went through winter, it was beautiful, there weren't very many pests, everything was great. And now you're in spring here in the south, and the pests are starting to ramp up. When you move into summer, the pests are going to be obscene. Everything you plant is going to have problems. Don't fight against it, guys. Start planting stuff out of season. Like I mentioned to somebody, like, take an entire bed and fill it with mustard greens or kale. Like, just seed it so heavy with that stuff and let the pests devour it. And they will. It's going to become like a huge infestation. And you're going to think, oh my gosh, they're going to keep coming. If you just leave them out there, don't try to save them. Don't try to spray them. Don't try to do anything. Just leave them out there for the pests to devour. What ends up happening is they have so many, like, say, aphids. They have so many aphids on these plants that ladybugs can almost like smell them out and they get here and they're like, ah, it's like a huge buffet. And then they start going to town. And even if they can't get control or create that balance that first season that they're here, the ladybugs know that there's tons of food here, and then they start having their babies and creating a life cycle. And then the next season, those babies wake up and they have food, and you're like, over a period of several seasons, they've expanded, you know, their production. The good bugs have expanded their production, and they start keeping all of those bad bugs down, and they keep this balance. So you're still going to see the bad bugs in your garden. I see whiteflies just now at the beginning of this video. I see whiteflies, but they're not excessive. They're not excessive because the good bugs already know this is a great buffet spot, and they stay here and they eat those whiteflies. The same will hold true. It's just that first year, they're going to be a little unbalanced because the good bugs haven't quite found you yet. But if you give them a huge buffet to eat, they will come here, and after a season or two that they have really like increased their numbers, they're going to have enough to balance it out to the point that you no longer ever have to treat. And I do want to just point this out for the new gardeners out there, the beginners, or even the intermediates. Maybe some people don't know this, but for every like 100 bad bugs you see, so for every 100 aphids you see, you might see one ladybug. And you might think that one ladybug is not enough to control these hundreds of aphids. That's not actually the case. These predatory bugs eat their weight in these bad bugs. They eat so much of them that when you're walking around your garden, it's very common for me to see hundreds of bad bugs and only see a handful of lacewings or a handful of predatory wasps, but it's enough. That small handful that's working in the garden, every one that you see, there's still some that you don't see, right? But they're also extremely ferocious eaters, so they will eat this large amount of pests, and it doesn't seem like it's equal, but it does. It works. If you're seeing good bugs in your garden, you probably have enough. Doesn't take very many of them to get that proper balance. Another concept of integrative pest management is using the least invasive or aggressive ways of managing a pest. So let's say you went down this road that I'm telling you about and you've created this balance, but all of a sudden one year, like I did 2 years ago, you have this huge mealybug infestation. There's different ways that you could handle that. You could walk through your garden with a bottle of 7 and spray the entire garden with 7 and kill everything. That would be probably one of the most aggressive ways. It's non-organic. You're spraying it indiscriminately across the entire garden. You're killing everything. That is the most aggressive. That is not integrative pest management. Integrative pest management would say use the least aggressive approach first. So, you know, dabbing the individual plant with the individual mealybug with a little bit of alcohol, being, you know, more of an organic substance, being very targeted to just that plant. That is the way to handle big infestations. If you have aphids, for instance, we talked about many different ways that you can handle aphids, from spraying them off with water being the least invasive way, to maybe doing some cinnamon, to diatoneous earth, to insecticidal soap, and then keep moving up that list. But if you start at the lowest, least aggressive approach and then slowly make your way up, targeting just the plant that has a problem, not the entire garden, that is integrated pest management. You're not trying to kill out all the bad bugs in your garden. You want them there so that the good bugs have something to eat, so that they stay around and they do all the work and you don't have to do it. Because I don't know about you, I don't like dealing with pests. I don't want to be this, you know, killer in the garden. I don't want to do those things. I want nature to be here. You know, I want them to have a place to eat. They belong here just as much as the good bugs belong here, just as much as I belong here, you know. So all of us living in harmony is where we're trying to go to. That's the point that we want to get to. So using less aggressive manners rather than trying to blanket the whole garden with some indiscriminate, you know, pest control method is really the better way to go if you want to eventually become very hands-off with pests in the garden. I hope you had fun hanging out with me today. I had fun hanging out with you, talking all about creepy crawly bugs. Don't forget to pick up your copy of the ebook, Homegrown Florida Gardening Guide. Thanks so much, guys. Happy gardening.